Molto graf ei sostenuto. Schwarze Milch der Frühe vertrinken sie abends. Black milk of daybreak, we drink you in the evening. We're shoveling a grave in the air, plenty wide, you'll rest easy. Remembering the coal town, Bristol, 1943, and the iron town, Birmingham, 1960. It was in transit, I felt them, between room and room and dream, fear and something general as the weather, underlying all these. Now the locomotives plying State Street, in the center, vacant after dark, were my first messengers from this. So I heard them again on South Side, the train's cries and the ubiquitous hum of the rails on the flats that carried a signal of connection, vibration, continuity, warning, and of mourning repeated, conveyed by a voice with a melody and a sorrow that was ceaseless. Between the low parallel ridges and downward, held over, at labor in the shallow hard basin of cement and ore, across some threshold within me, down from the ear into the body, the sound into vibrations, the thought into fear. As they receded toward the Gulf, from the second heard messages to the first, through the echoes, which were endless, dispersed everywhere. Wir trinken und trinken, no louder than the sound before, than the thought of the sound before. On the crumbling facades downtown, on the windowless north wall of the psychiatric wing, repeated in the memory that is their resonance. In the wide parks I felt them, like an undercurrent deep in wires, wondering, was it my thought of them, or the beat of my heart, or their echoes on the bare surfaces, the vibrations of the trains moving under us, or from elsewhere, from the chimneys' red fires over Bessemer on the horizon of the city, Ypres, Dresden, Nagasaki, Buchenwald, Belsen, Birkenau, the scorched and tangled neurons in the brain of my father, or the remote sanctuary of the small church 8 blocks away, from the time to come, from all of these together, from everywhere, continuous and ceaseless, sostenuto, molto grave. Wir schaffen ein Grab in den Lüften, da liegt man nicht hin.
Chicago to New York, from Chicago, from Chicago, from Chicago to New York, from Chicago to New York.
Crack train from New York. Crack train from New York.
From a tape labeled Downfall. I'm back in August, late August of '91. I want to read some notes from May the 7th. I was thinking about Appalachian fall again, in Philo's sense of fall, of degradation, decay, the passing of the beautiful, of the animals, the birds, and the trees, of the great life and the spirit which impelled it, which so enriched and amplified his own. And I was wondering if the poverty of his life on the mountain and its severe constraints hadn't opened him to this life and its treasures because he had no other. And now I'm thinking in terms of the funeral, Flora Lightfoot's funeral, which I've been writing about some, a passage from which began this tape, on the other side of the tape. How the apogee, how the moment of grace, which for me was the moment of Flora's burial high on the cemetery hill, when Philo turned in the midst of the family and said goodbye to Flora. How that is followed by breakdown, almost necessarily it seems. The family members going deeper into grief and losing touch with each other in the process, so that there's a descent degradation. The words escaped him, his goodbye, Mama, goodbye. They surprised him. He was unprepared for them, and so were we. The words became a cry from outside the ceremony, outside the order of things. They swept through the tent like a sudden breeze from elsewhere, from high on the Hammonds field, the Luster field, the coal fields, from transit camps, logging camps, CCC camps, from barracks, boxcars, haystacks, fodder shocks, Salvation Army shelters, from bridges flung high above rivers, and blew through the words expected of us in the close air, from outside, where he had lived his life, through the stale air, the dead air, the air of the dead we breathed in and lived on. Like Celan's Niemand's Rosa. But back in May, I was thinking about the panorama, the long view of Cleo's sorrow, her lifelong sorrow, really, and yet longer than her life, since its thread reaches back at least to her grandfather, Thad Welburn, mayor of West Jefferson, North Carolina, and Glade. Catastrophe passing down through generations, one mistake or mishap to another, the father to the daughter, to the son, to the granddaughter, and on. Cleo's failure to advise Laurie, or to prevent her, to caution her sternly against Al Asher. Now I see as descending, or falling, or continuing her descent, from her ancestors, from her grandfather's abandonment of her mother's mother and of her mother and aunts, a part of the same current, downward passing stream or cataract, which swept her and Laurie away down to Rice Terrace, through a dozen grimy trailer courts and drug dens. Now I see, with Cleo and through her, the long train of downfalls, of steps descending, the wrongdoing of one generation that lives in the successive ones, until, stripped of every advantage, it becomes a pure and uncontrollable mischief. Hawthorne. So the father and grandfather, Thaddeus, gave them his learning, his gentleness and civility, and left them with nothing and no recourse. And partly through Cleo and partly through Philo, her brother, I see Thad's daughter, their mother. When they first come into the mountains, across the river into Virginia, when Thaddeus become mayor of Glade, she was the most beautiful woman anybody had ever seen in those parts. And she was courted by a gentleman, Sam Dillard, the high sheriff, which was an office that carried honor back then. But Laurie didn't marry him. When her mammy took them back to North Carolina, Laurie met and married Reuben Lightfoot, a man without distinction, who detested distinction, a rabid leveler, hater of the Thad Welborns of earth, and so, maybe, her soul brother, who spent his nights fighting, drinking, and card-playing, and dancing and fiddling, being as wild and passionate a dancer as she was, and she'd won many prizes, and his days cutting extract wood for 30 cents a cord, and whose mind was damaged early in a fight with English Potter, the most feared man in Ashe County. That Potter, he'd ride right past the sheriff's office with his saddlebags full of liquor in a graveyard outside West Jefferson, so that by the time they finished, they'd toppled several tombstones, and Reuben had hurt that Potter, so he had to go to bed afterwards for the first time ever, a man almost twice his size. But in revenge, Potter stomped his head against a tombstone with hobnail boots and left him for dead, damaged him for life, and for lives, many lives, and many generations. These light feet, what is it about them that so appeals? It's Cleo looking out, as if she could look from the ovens in Dachau, or the embers in Nagasaki, as if reaching down in her fall, she could touch some hidden stream or conduit in the deep life of my century, and relate it, conduct it to me, the current in the bonds which hold her in, charges me even now to keep in touch with what I feel to be most real, most full of darkness, as if I could jump the freight with her brother on the Black Cut out of Chilhowie and find myself sealed in on the potato fields outside Krakow and greet the strangers and thank them for who they are. Here's a passage from March, a little earlier. I wrote this with Karl Planck in mind and to him, after reading his essay on my work. For years I was working in a vacuum. It was deliberately chosen, but still it was hard sometimes. I used to go deeper into the mountain to cut wood above the Price graves. I remember the sharp thud on the opposite ridge from the Luster field where the Lightfoot cabin was. As if someone were there, working beside me, driving an axe blade into a deadlock. As if no one were there, no one else. I'd clap my hands and listen to the stillness and emptiness of the mountains, and to the echo which scored the stillness, for it was this sound of stillness, as this stillness was of absence, the absence of the hoot owl and the screech owl, the woodpecker and wood thrush, the wildcat and bobcat, the panther and the whippoorwill. Of all the great animals, the small game and birds, which my friend and guide, Philo, has described for me so vividly, making the mountain come alive again in memory. Of Lou Brown, a mysterious woman. Nobody knowed where she come from, or why she come here. Of Rube Woods, her murderer. Of the ghost of Lou Brown. Of Ellen Walden, who built up fires and slept by the road with her 36 Colt. Of Abe Fullen, the black man she lived with and had a child by. Bob Walden, who was raised by Jim Walden, a white man whom Ellen married. And she made him the cleanest wife you ever saw. Of the 8 black brothers who were poisoned and buried in a common grave where a poplar had blowed over by the one brother who was sick and hadn't eaten. Then he went and hanged himself out by the Tin Bridge. So they call it to this day the Hangman Woods. Of Romy, the bee-man from the north of Naples, master mason, calligrapher, and grafter of fruit trees. Of Private Riffy, who shot Stonewall, or so he believed, hoed corn and reflected. Of Laurie Welburn, the mayor's daughter, who hoed corn also and took in washing. Of Laurie's daughter, Cleo Lightfoot, the flower of the mountain. Of the Lightfoots in the Lightfoot holler. Of the bird songs in the birdsong holler, of whom I have thought much and written elsewhere. But I was thinking of Carl when I wrote this. Carl, we must not despair. We must not lose hope, because the road to the kingdom is, as Buber describes it, paved with unknowns, even with defeat in the world's eyes. The road to the kingdom is the road of victory, though the road is endless and the victory is of no one. So many having fallen, that the way not be lost, that the world once common to all of us might be recalled and restored. So this is March 4th. I'm thinking of the spoons in Carl's essay, with photograph he sent me, cutlery unearthed in forest floor, Auschwitz. Spoons, like miniatures, sculptures, so many hollowed out, buried, surfaced of late, scratched from the topsoil, matted in humus, in fibrous roots, in sylvan dell, pastoral, idyllic, like klopstock, hundreds held open, hollowed out, holding nothing, like hands, bare, open, like faces on their long necks, cupped and held open on the vacant sky, like fremda, strangers, stripped of spoons, as of clothing, as of words, as of rights, as of sex, as of civility, as of thoughts, as of a thought like this, in quiet mind, in glowing woodland, a thought of openness, of vulnerability, of the long, curved body of the handle, spreading toward the neck, widening into the head cup, like an open eye on its neck stalk, an open mouth, an open mind, a thought that there will be something there to receive. How strange to think in freedom, in quiet mind, in glowing woodland. A spoon is waiting, trustful, that there is something there which may be received. A spoon is open, like a violin, to the music which may be held for a moment in it, and so received, and like a hand to its gift, as to all the gifts, to the gift of all. Even as it holds us, as it delivers its spoonful to the mouth, which opens to it. It reminds me too of Hannah Kali, when she first came to the mountain, her back bald, plastered with oil, as of higher mammals, dolphins, sea otters, drowning in oil, tangled in nets after Valdez, elephants in the zoo in Kuwait City, shot by the Iraqis, lumps in hide where bullets went in. The spoon holds the thought in its openness, a violation in the eyes of the great creature. So they turn from the camera. They do not want to look at us or anything we have, to stay, be looked at. They are caught, pinned. They cannot go anywhere. They can only look away. Yet the look is open, despite itself, receptive, like a thought in quiet mind, in glowing woodland. The eye is God's spoon. So many buried, so many hidden, so many still packed together, still, in matted roots, in quiet woodland. Yah, fremda, stripped, gaping, eyeless, earless, mouthless, voiceless, concave. Be wakeful reminds us a remnant. Be mindful, beware. even of a thought like this, in quiet mind, in glowing woodland. Remember, beware. What is held together. What is held may be spilled, may fall, may not be delivered, may never be raised again to the mouth. So must be held carefully, so must be raised carefully, be held in a balance, held firmly, held delicately, like the word in the mouth, with precision, with care.
From Chicago. From Chicago. From Chicago. From Chicago to New York. From Chicago to New York. From Chicago. From Chicago. From Chicago to New York. From Chicago to New York.
Crack train from New York. Crack train from New York. Crack train from New York. Crack train from New York and 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 New York. Crack train from New York. Crack train from New York and New York.
This is a quick go. Quick go. And he said, don't breathe. 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 Into the strength awakens. Into the strength awakens. For 4 days and 4 nights. For 4 days and 4 nights. And then we went through these strange sounding names. Strange sounding